Hello and welcome to LFC Focus. So Liverpool have just won their final game of pre-season before the season kicks off for real with the game against West Ham in the Premier League at the weekend. We've beaten Torino by 3-1, and all things considered, it was a fairly nice run out for the team. I thought certainly in the first half we saw some very positive signs. It was a side that was probably pretty close to what's going to go out against West Ham on Sunday. I think certainly the front three, Salah, Firmino, Mane, that's almost definitely going to be the attack that starts unless Firmino is just slightly off the pace in terms of fitness. When it comes to midfield, I think Firmino and KEITA both pretty much nailed on. Wijnaldum a little bit less so, but I thought he did his chances absolutely no harm today whatsoever. Slightly more sketchy around the defence. You know, I feel like Alexander-Arnold, I'll come on to him later, but there are still fitness questions around him. Nat Phillips is probably going to make way for Joe Gomez, but I thought all things considered, considering that was the lineup that's probably going to play against West Ham, I think there were a lot of positive signs in that first 45 minutes. It was certainly interesting because Torino were definitely playing a much lower block than I think we've seen against most of the sides we played in pre-season. You know, against Napoli, they were much more open. They played a very high defensive line, and that's one of the reasons that Liverpool ended up smashing them by 5-0. Torino certainly came to avoid a scoreline like that, and I think that did us a lot of favours because that's something that we're going to come up against a lot this season, certainly in those early games. When you look at our first fixtures in the calendar, you've got West Ham, you've got Palace, you've got Brighton, you've got Leicester. These are teams that are going to make it difficult for Liverpool to attack, difficult for us to get into the final third and actually create goal scoring chances. So I think the experience that the players had today was absolutely vital, and I think they dealt with the situations they were put in very, very well. You know, while it wasn't necessarily as exciting as Napoli, you know, the build-up play was a little bit slower. We didn't create as many chances. We didn't score as many goals at the end of the day. I think what we saw was very, very encouraging. Certainly the speed with which the players linked up, and that's something that will be crucial to breaking those low block defensives down, because the longer you take on the ball, the more time you deliberate over what pass you're going to play, the more time you're giving them to set themselves up and to organise themselves, and you don't want to be giving the opposition any time to adjust to whatever you do. You want to be catching them at a speed that they just can't handle, and that's something that Liverpool look to be trying to do today. You know, there is one chance that really stood out for me, and it's one that didn't actually end up with a goal or even really a goal scoring chance, but it happens. It goes KEITA to Salah to Firmino back to Salah, and then it tries to go through to Mane, but the pass is just slightly too heavy. But what I really liked about it was the speed of the link-up play. You know, it was all one-touch passing, and it was close to the goal as well. You know, it was in a position where the defence were really being put under pressure, and the speed that those passes were being played meant that they had no time whatsoever to actually try and deal with what Liverpool were doing. And if that pass from Salah had just been a little bit less heavy, then Liverpool would have probably had a certain goal there. So I think the signs today were very, very positive. I think Mane was certainly a key player in putting the defence on the back foot, because I really liked the way that he was incredibly direct in that first half. You know, when we talk about Mane this season and his role within the front three, a lot of people do see him as the most deep-lying player, the one who's going to cut inside, almost play as a number 10 coming off the wing like Phil Coutinho used to do. So it's nice to see that he is also still trying to get at defenders, go outside them and drive towards the goal as well, because you just don't want him to become too predictable. And it certainly looked today like he was hungry for goals, and I think that is a fantastic trait to have. And it's also what eventually wins the penalty. And you know, it's a weird penalty because it's not like Mane throws himself to the ground or anything like that, but it is the kind of penalty that you hope Liverpool will get a lot of this season, because the defender's just far too physical with Mane. He's throwing legs in, and while Mane does try to keep himself up, because you know, it's great to see that he still backs himself to score the goal, to actually get in and create the chance, it's good refereeing to actually pull it back and say, no, what you're doing is unfair here. And obviously Fabinho misses the penalty, and I will come on to Fabinho later as well, but at the end of the day, the guy had a fantastic penalty record for Monaco. It's something like a 95% conversion rate, which is way ahead of most players in the league. So one missed penalty, while it might, you know, it could do bad things for his confidence, but you know, he's got such a fantastic record that hopefully it won't get to him too much. I personally wouldn't worry about him, and if he takes a penalty at the weekend against West Ham, I wouldn't be worried at all with him taking it. So yeah, I think Mane was really, really good with his directness and obviously winning the penalty and creating a lot of goal scoring chances, and all in all, putting defenders on the back foot, you know, putting them under pressure, asking questions of them, and actually putting them in a situation where they have to be proactive to try and stop chances. And that's not what defenders want to do, because if you make them do that for a full 90 minutes, they're going to be absolutely knackered by the end of the game. So that was fantastic from Mane. I thought what was really, really impressive, and some of this was facilitated by Fabinho as well, was the level to which the midfield players in KEITA and Wijnaldum actually pushed up. You know, KEITA was key to this. I think Wijnaldum kind of followed suit because he saw what KEITA was doing and thought, actually, I want to get in on that act a little bit. it, but it is something else that's going to really help against low blocks, is bridging that gap between midfield and defence so that we've got players on the edge of the box, because far too often the problem that we had was we had players in the box, we had fellas waiting for the ball in to create a chance, but then the midfield players were just about 10 yards too far back an awful lot last season. And that it's hard to criticise the players for that because we just didn't have the creative players on our side. But I think what we saw from KEITA and eventually Wijnaldum as well in that first half was incredibly encouraging, in that they were playing in something that's called the half spaces in between the defence and midfield. It's something that Man City did so well last season with their attacking midfield players like David Silva and Bernardo Silva and Kevin De Bruyne as well. It's how they created a lot of their chances against the low block sides, and it's certainly something Liverpool should be looking to do this season. So I thought that was really, really impressive. Like I said, KEITA was fantastic. He's key to that. He's going to be so important for Liverpool this season in an attacking sense and a defensive sense as well. And it was nice to see Wijnaldum linking up and joining in with him in that as well. And it's a really good finish from Wijnaldum as well for his goal. I think both of the goals came essentially from really, really good composure in what were very, very tight spaces. And again, I'm talking about the low block thing a lot, but that's the main thing that I took away from that first half, was how we dealt with a really difficult defence. And I think the composure shown from Firmino and then Wijnaldum when they scored their goals was absolutely vital, because you're never going to get that much space in the box. Even Wijnaldum, who breaks through the defence, he gets beyond them. He's essentially in one-on-one. It's not long before a defender starts catching up and puts him under pressure and forces him essentially to take the shot. It puts him in a now or never situation where he's got to try and score. So I think the way that they dealt with those high pressure situations, having to take a shot when they did, was really, really impressive. And again, something that will be really, really useful against low blocks. So yeah, some really, really encouraging signs in that first half when you look ahead to the competitive games that we're going to be playing over the next few weeks. I think in terms of individual performances as well, Trent Alexander-Arnold looked really, really sharp. He is someone who, as I mentioned at the top of the video, there were a lot of questions around whether or not he's going to be fit enough for the first game of the season. He came back a week earlier than maybe he would have been expected. Jurgen Klopp allowed him to cut his holiday short. And I think what we saw today, to me, suggested that he's absolutely ready to take on the challenge of playing Premier League football at the weekend. He got a solid half hour against Napoli. He gets about a full hour today, which is really impressive for someone so early in their pre-season. And I think everything he did looked really, really good. And if I'm honest, it's a bit of a leap because we're basing all of this on a very short appearance in a pre-season game. But I think he looks like he's actually improving from what he was showing last season. And it's something I said last season, that the biggest compliment you can give Trent Alexander-Arnold is, at 19 years old and at such an early stage in his development, he doesn't necessarily need to get better to actually be good enough to play in this Liverpool side. The current level that he's at is good enough that if he stayed like that for 10 years, none of us would really mind that much. But from what we've seen so far in pre-season, he already looks like he's taking the game to the next level. Defensively, he covered well in one moment where Torino tried to break. I think Nat Phillips is a centre-back who gets caught out, and Trent Alexander-Arnold covers for him really well, which is a very good thing, because when you think about the West Ham game, the fact that it's probably going to be Joe Gomez on that right-hand side of the centre-back partnership, someone who doesn't have that much experience there, he's maybe going to need someone to cover for him a couple of times. So that was good from Trent Alexander-Arnold. I thought the way he got forward as well, whipping in some really good crosses, something we saw last season. He's carrying on doing that as well. And one thing that really stood out for me as well, and it's a very small thing, it's probably something that most people will have missed or seen as very insignificant, but there's a moment where he presses the ball and he goes to charge down a pass, but he doesn't just run straight at the player. He runs towards him and then he stops dead, because it's all about this idea of intelligent pressing rather than just blindly running after the ball and trying to close players down. He doesn't just run at the player, he runs and then stops because he's got into the right position to actually press. And what he ends up doing is he ends up cutting out the pass really well, and I'm pretty sure it actually leads to a Liverpool attack. So that's something that was really impressive from Trent Alexander-Arnold. Something that stood out for me, seeing that his football brain is already going up and up in terms of levels in such a short space of time as well. He is progressing so quickly, and he could end up being a really, really incredible player for Liverpool in the future. And I think he looks absolutely ready for the challenge against West Ham at the weekend. I think Fabinho, good and bad moments, which is essentially the story of Fabinho's pre-season so far. Jurgen Klopp has come out and said that he's going to take a little bit more time than the others to adjust. He's not quite used to Liverpool's style. The Premier League might be a little bit of a leap for him as well, possibly. And it's also a new role for him as well, playing number 6. It's not quite the midfield double pivot that he was playing in at Monaco as well. So it makes sense that he is going to have those good and bad moments. Like I said, you have the missed penalty. There are a couple of moments where he lets a pass get away from him and it almost leads to a Torino attack, and you do worry that maybe, Premier League teams could take advantage of that even more and it could cause us a few problems. But I think we did see some really, really good things from Fabinho as well. You know, there were moments where whenever he seems to receive the ball from a fullback or from a centre-back, the way that he turns so quickly and starts moving the play forward is just something that we've lacked from our defensive midfielders in the past. You know, Jordan Henderson is fantastic, and I don't buy into this whole shtick that, you know, he always passes backwards and he's a terrible person when it comes to trying to start attacks, but he isn't quite on the level of Fabinho. And I think that what Fabinho did in this game, you know, if he can iron out the creases and improve on the good parts of his game that are there already, then he's going to be incredibly useful for Liverpool. And I think, look, it's going to take time. He's not going to slot into the side maybe as seamlessly as KEITA did, but over the course of this season, I think by December, we will be absolutely raving about Fabinho. So some good signs from him today. Hopefully, he can just get rid of those few little kinks in his game that he does need to iron out. I think Salah was another very interesting performance in that first half, because as part of the whole low block thing, we certainly saw him getting a lot more attention than he's used to in the past, and that's something that he will definitely have to get used to this season. As someone who broke the goal scoring record last season, who had the season in general that he did, defenders are going to be aware of what he's trying to do, and they are going to spend so much time and effort trying to shut him down. And I think it already looks like he's getting used to that. You know, his body strength, he used it really, really well in that game to shake off centre-backs. You know, he had a similar situation when he was trying to deal with Kalidou Koulibaly in the game against Napoli as well. I think it's interesting to see how much he's passing as well. You know, he doesn't always do what maybe Sadio Mane would do, where he takes on a defender. A lot of the time, he's always got his head up. He's always looking for the pass. And that's what I mean about him getting used to this situation where he's being put under more pressure, where defenders are giving him more attention. He is going to have to pass more. And that could end up being a good thing for Liverpool, because if defenders put more attention on him, they're going to start ignoring other players on the pitch. And if Salah makes sure that he's always looking for those players that are going to end up in space because of the players that are trying to mark him, then it will only serve to help Liverpool. Kind of like it did with Luis Suarez back in 2014, where defenders would double up on him, and it meant that players like Sterling and Sturridge and Coutinho and Gerrard and Henderson were getting more space because of it. So it really feels like Salah is adjusting to that situation already and making the best of it, and hopefully it should lead to Liverpool getting some more goals next season. And then finally, in terms of the first half, Nat Phillips, you know, a player that I did want to keep an eye on because there was a lot of pressure on him. You know, is his Anfield bow with the centre-back injury situation at the moment? There is every possibility that we will have to use Nat Phillips in some capacity in the first month of the season. I think he had very much a mixed bag in terms of his performances. You know, I think he does make an error for the goal. He just lets this man get away from him, but he's a young player. He's only just come through from the academy. This is his first experience of first team football, and his first experience of playing in front of a crowd like that at Anfield, and coming up against a forward as talented and experienced as Belotti. You probably are going to make mistakes, and at the end of the day, that's only going to be good for his development. You know, you want him to make those mistakes now rather than in competitive matches. And I think actually, after he made that mistake, I think he played better, because beforehand it felt like he was playing within himself. It felt like he was being cautious and just thinking, well, if I don't make any mistakes, then that will improve my chances of getting a stint in the first team. But once he made the mistake, he became more proactive. He looked like he was actually trying to impress. Whenever he received the ball, he was driving forward more. He was looking for more ambitious passes, looking for the passes that were actually going to start attacks and stuff like that. So I think it did actually do him the world of good making that mistake. And like I said, the fact that it only happened in pre-season is also handy, because that's where you want him to be making those mistakes. You know, at the end of the day, maybe he isn't ready for the Premier League yet. I have sung his praises in pre-season, and I do think he should be challenging Joe Gomez for the centre-back spot in those first few games before you know, Matip and Klavan come back from injury and Dejan Lovren comes into the fray. But I think maybe on the signs of this game, he's not quite ready for competitive football just yet, but still some promising signs there from Nat Phillips. And then the second half came along, and this was much bittier. You know, there was plenty of changes in personnel, which is understandable. You don't really want to be giving anyone who's going to play against West Ham more than 45 minutes, because they do need a rest. The game is only 5 days away now, so I can totally understand where Jurgen Klopp's came from there. So there was a huge change in personnel. It did mess the team around a little bit, and a change in formation as well, which was very interesting. You know, it felt very much like a flat 4-4-2, you know, with Sturridge and Ings as the two strikers. It did kind of become at times a 4-4-1-1, because Sturridge, as we've seen him do in pre-season, did drop deep a lot more. He played in that kind of number 10 or second striker role, trying to be more creative than goal scoring, and there were promising signs for him today. I think Shaqiri was a very, very interesting one in that second half, because to me, he doesn't actually suit the role of, a traditional winger, someone who's going to be asked to get to the byline, to hang around outside the box and whip crosses in for the strikers or something like that. I think if you're going to play Shaqiri on the wing, it should be as a Liverpool winger. It should be as someone like Mo Salah or Sadio Mane, who's going to cut inside, occasionally drop deep, try and get goals, try and create from the middle of the pitch, because that's where Shaqiri has looked his best so far in a Liverpool shirt. In the moment that stands out from that game where he gets that fantastic assist, the chipped ball for Daniel Sturridge, which just shows great vision, great technique, great ability to just, do that when there's so many players around him as well and a lot of pressure. To pick Daniel Sturridge out perfectly like that and monitor the run and play the ball to it perfectly was absolutely sublime from Xherdan Shaqiri. And it just, to me, shows that his best position, certainly at Liverpool, is in that central role, whether it's as a winger that cuts inside or as a false nine or as a box-to-box midfielder or a number 10. I think he's best in that area of the pitch. That feels like where he can influence the game the most, and that's what's really impressed us about Xherdan Shaqiri in this pre-season, is the level of influence he's had. The amount of times he gets on the ball, the amount of times he's starting attacks or keeping attacks going with his very, very good passing, which is not something any of us really expected. His eye for a pass is so much better than we were ever led to believe from what we saw at Stoke and what we even saw earlier on in his career. So I think Shaqiri, not as good as usual, but I think most of that is down to where he was placed on the pitch, out a lot wider than he has usually been. And when he came inside, he did show why Liverpool fans are so excited about him. And again, another player that if he does start against West Ham, I'm happy. I want to see him play at the weekend, whether it's in a starting role or whether it's coming on late in the game. He can change games with the way that he plays. So I'm really liking Xherdan Shaqiri at the moment, and I'm just looking forward to seeing more of him in a Liverpool shirt. And then Daniel Sturridge obviously gets the goal. Another player who was very, very lively. One thing that really stood out for me today, like I said, even though he was the second striker, almost the number 10 at times, dropping deep to give Danny Ings maybe a little bit more space further forward. Ings was the one who's doing a bit more running in behind. We did see a nice amount of Daniel Sturridge getting behind defenses and creating goal-scoring chances. It's something that I highlighted in the Napoli game. I said that was what impressed me about that match, was even though he was still being creative, playing as a number 10, he was still trying to get goals himself and still being a threat in that manner. And that is something that will help against low blocks as well. Someone who, sometimes will drop deep to be a number 10 and sometimes will go forward and play as a number 9. It just makes him more unpredictable and much more difficult for defenders to deal with him. And I think that's essentially why he gets his goal at the end of the day. The defenders are not expecting him to make that run into the box, make the run on goal. And as well, it's a fantastic pass from Shaqiri to pick him out, and then a great header as well. And just having someone who finishes as well as Daniel Sturridge will be a real asset for Liverpool this season. And like Shaqiri, he's another player who, if he plays against West Ham, I am happy and I want to see him playing in a Liverpool shirt, because he is doing absolutely fantastically at the moment. So yeah, all in all, a pretty nice way to sign off pre-season. Obviously not quite as impressive as the Napoli game, but I think a lot of that is down to the proximity of this game to the kickoff against West Ham. We were never going to be at full throttle. We were going to be slightly withdrawn, and it was a bit more of a training exercise than a match like the Napoli one was, but still some very, very promising signs. I think Liverpool are in a better shape now than they really have ever been going into a season, certainly in my time as a supporter. So plenty to be excited about. If you are not looking forward to seeing this Liverpool team play on Sunday, then you are absolutely mad. So yeah, that is all for today's video. Thank you guys very, very much for watching. If you did enjoy this video, why not give it a like? If you're new around here as well, hit that subscribe button there. Check out some of the other videos that have been out on the channel over the past few days as well. Don't forget to follow at LFC Focus TV on Twitter, and I'll be back on Thursday with the pre-match video for the Premier League opener against West Ham. Until then, bye for now.